The hum of the space station echoed in the long, cold corridors. It was a rhythm that had become all too familiar to the crew of the Phoenix. For years, the station had floated silently in the void of space, monitoring the unexplored sector, cataloging anomalies, and scanning the distant stars. The crew had grown used to the isolation, the stillness, the silence. But tonight was different. Commander Ethan Mitchell stared out from the observation deck, his hands resting on the cold metal railing. The dark expanse of space spread out before him, broken only by the distant twinkle of stars. He could feel it, the tension in the air, the unease that seemed to pulse through the station. Something was coming. Something unknown. He wasn't the only one who sensed it. Everyone aboard felt it. The Phoenix was stationed on the edge of the uncharted nebula, a place where few humans had ever dared to venture. No one had expected much. There were no signs of alien life, no strange signals or strange phenomena. It was just a dark, silent corner of the universe. Or so they thought. "Ethan," came the voice of Lieutenant Rachel Johnson, cutting through the hum of the station. "You need to see this." Ethan turned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What's going on?" Rachel, usually composed, was visibly shaken. Her fingers hovered over her console, her eyes wide. "You need to look at the scanner data. There's something out there." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He approached the console, his gaze locking onto the readout. At first glance, it looked like a blip, nothing more than a random fluctuation in the station's sensors. But as Rachel zoomed in, the blip grew more defined. It was an anomaly. And not just any anomaly. It was a ship. Not just any ship either. It was enormous. A dark, jagged shape that stretched out like a weapon, a thing of nightmare rather than a ship. The scanners couldn't determine its exact composition, nor could they measure its distance accurately. It was simply there. Looming in the deep, quiet blackness of space, like a predator lurking in the shadows. "Ethan, it wasn't there a minute ago," Rachel's voice quivered. "We don't know how it got there. We don't know what it is." "We need to wake up the others," Ethan said, his voice steady but carrying a tension that was palpable. "Get everyone to the command deck. Now." Rachel nodded and rushed off, leaving Ethan alone with the screen. His mind raced, analyzing the possibilities. It wasn't just a ship. This was something else. Something alien. No human craft looked like this. No human technology operated this way. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the image. The ship had an otherworldly, alien quality. It seemed to pulse with an unsettling, unnatural energy. A faint glow emanated from its hull, casting a strange, sickly light that illuminated the black space around it. And then, it did something that sent chills down Ethan's spine. The ship moved. It didn't just drift. It moved with purpose, sliding through space like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Ethan's hand tightened around the railing as he tried to process the situation. Should he be afraid? Should he be calm? He had been trained for moments like this, encounters with the unknown. But this felt different. The way the ship moved, how it seemed to appear out of nowhere, it felt intentional. It felt like it knew they were watching. The rest of the crew arrived in a flurry of activity. Lieutenant Johnson, Commander Ethan Mitchell, and the rest of the senior staff gathered in the control room, watching the alien ship through the large viewing window. Their faces were drawn, pale with disbelief, as the enormity of what was happening began to sink in. "It's not showing up on our communication channels," reported Sergeant Lucas Dwyer, his fingers tapping furiously on the console. "No signs of distress, no signals. It's not broadcasting anything." "We've been in the dark for too long," Ethan said, his voice firm. "Prepare the shuttle. We're going out there." The decision was immediate. There was no time to hesitate. They had to make contact, to understand what was happening before it was too late. The alien ship, if that's even what it was, couldn't just be ignored. Not with the stakes as high as they were. The mystery of it, the sheer presence, it called to them, and they couldn't turn away. The shuttle launched into the cold, black void of space. The Phoenix stayed behind, its lights flickering faintly against the backdrop of stars. On board the shuttle, the crew sat in tense silence, each one mentally preparing for what was about to unfold. Ethan sat in the captain's chair, his hands gripping the armrests. Lieutenant Rachel Johnson was at his side, her eyes never leaving the view of the alien ship, which loomed larger and larger in the shuttle's window. The ship's design was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't made of smooth surfaces or sleek lines like human ships. Instead, its hull appeared jagged, as though it had been carved from some strange material. It shimmered faintly in the dim light of space, casting odd reflections on the shuttle's windows. The rest of the crew was silent, each one feeling the weight of the situation. The tension was unbearable. Approaching at half speed, Ethan muttered. No sudden movements. As the shuttle inched closer, the alien ship's vast scale became apparent. It was far larger than anything the humans had ever built. It stretched out into space, a monolithic structure that looked more like a weapon than a vessel. A small part of Ethan's mind wondered how something like this had remained hidden for so long. It was an enigma. And then, as if in response to their approach, the ship did something that none of them were prepared for. A series of lights blinked to life on the ship's surface, and a low hum reverberated through the shuttle. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't a sound that came from any familiar technology. It was something different, something ancient. The lights began to pulse, growing brighter and brighter until they were almost blinding. Prepare for contact, Ethan ordered. He didn't know why, but he felt a surge of urgency. Something inside him told him that the moment of contact had arrived. The shuttle moved closer, the alien ship now looming directly ahead. The distance between them shrank to almost nothing. The ship's surface was covered with intricate patterns, shapes that seemed to shift and change, as if the vessel itself were alive. There was no way to predict what would happen next. And then, it happened. A beam of light shot out from the ship, aimed directly at the shuttle. It wasn't hostile, at least, not in the way they had feared. It was as if the ship was, reaching out to them, trying to make contact in some way that was beyond their understanding. The beam washed over the shuttle, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The entire crew was paralyzed by the sheer force of it. A voice crackled through the shuttle's comms. Humanity, the voice echoed, deep and resonant, though it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We have been waiting. You have been found. The time of your reckoning is at hand. The message sent a shockwave through the crew. They stared at the comms panel, their minds racing to comprehend what had just happened. Who were they? What did they want? But before anyone could respond, the transmission was cut off. Silence. The crew sat in stunned disbelief, unable to process the weight of what they had just witnessed. The alien ship was still there, its lights flickering in the distance, but the moment of contact had ended. And now, they were left with a question. What now? The crew of the Phoenix was in shock. The message they had received was still fresh in their minds, echoing through the empty corridors of the station, vibrating like an unseen force. Humanity, we have been waiting. You have been found. The time of your reckoning is at hand. Ethan Mitchell sat in the command room, the silence oppressive as his crew watched the alien ship from the observation deck. The ship remained exactly where it had been since the transmission, a dark, imposing figure in the void of space, its faint glow casting an eerie light over the station. But now, something had changed. The ship's sudden activity, the mysterious transmission, and the voice that had come through the comms, they were all puzzles, pieces of a larger mystery that no one on board was ready to solve. Not yet. We need to make sense of this, Ethan said, his voice strained but firm. Rachel, get the scans back online. We need to know more about that ship. Lieutenant Rachel Johnson was already at her console, her fingers dancing over the keys. I'm on it. But we're still not getting a full reading. The ship's energy signatures are unlike anything we've encountered before. There's something about it, something off. Ethan rubbed his temple, frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. It had been hours since the transmission, and still, they had no answers. The alien ship wasn't sending any more signals, and their efforts to communicate were met with silence. It was as if the ship was waiting for them to make the next move. Sir, Sergeant Lucas Dwyer spoke up, his voice cutting through the room. There's something we're missing. What if this, whatever this is, wasn't meant to happen right now? What if we've triggered something? Ethan looked at Lucas, his mind racing. Triggered? What do you mean? Think about it, Lucas continued, his eyes flicking to the observation window, where the alien ship still loomed. We weren't supposed to find it. We didn't even know it was there. What if, we were never meant to make contact? Ethan's gut twisted at the thought. The more he thought about it, the more the situation felt wrong. The ship's sudden appearance, the message, the strange energy, everything about it seemed intentional, yet out of their control. As if they had unknowingly crossed a line they weren't meant to cross. Get me the communications team, Ethan said, pushing back his chair. We need to try again. If this is a test, we need to pass it. The crew worked throughout the night, trying to decipher the alien ship's language, attempting to regain control of the situation. Every attempt at communication was met with more silence. The strange pattern of light from the alien ship continued to flicker in the distance, almost like a slow, deliberate pulse. As the hours wore on, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, monitored, even. It was as if the aliens knew every move they made before they even made it. It was unnerving. It wasn't until the following morning, if you could call it morning in the endless black void of space, that something unexpected happened. A signal, faint but distinct, flashed across their screens. It was a pattern, a sequence of numbers and symbols, unlike anything they had ever seen. It's happening again, Rachel said, her voice tense. This is definitely coming from the alien ship. Decoding it, Lieutenant Dwyer replied quickly, typing furiously at his console. The rest of the crew crowded around, their faces etched with anticipation. The symbols flickered across the screen, and then, slowly, the message began to take shape. It was a simple translation, but it carried an unnerving weight. We have been watching you. Your species has evolved, but it has not yet reached its potential. You are children of the stars, but you are blind to the vastness of the universe. Ethan's chest tightened. The message was clearer now, but its implications were even more disturbing. The aliens knew about humanity's history, knew about their evolution. It was as if they had been studying humanity for centuries, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Wait, Rachel said, her eyes scanning the screen. There's more. The message continued. You are not the first. Many others have come before you, but they failed. They perished because they did not understand the cost of ascension. Your kind has been chosen, but you must prove you are worthy. You must prove you are ready. Ethan's mind raced. Prove we're ready for what? He muttered under his breath. The message had taken on a sinister tone. Is this a test? Or is it a warning? Lucas Dwyer was the first to speak. What if they're saying that humanity was chosen? What if they believe we're the next step in some cosmic plan? The room fell silent. The idea was chilling, almost unfathomable. Humanity had always considered itself the apex of evolution, the dominant species of Earth. But now, faced with the possibility that they were part of a much larger, far-reaching cosmic design, that illusion shattered. What do we do now? Rachel asked, her voice trembling slightly. How do we even begin to understand this? Ethan paced the length of the room, his mind spinning with the possibilities. We don't have a choice. We have to engage with them. We have to find out what they want and what they're offering. As the crew continued their preparations, the tension in the station grew palpable. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was fear, uncertainty, and the overwhelming weight of the unknown. The message had revealed only the tip of the iceberg. Humanity, for all its achievements, was still a child in the grand scheme of the universe. And that realization was both humbling and terrifying. Meanwhile, the alien ship remained stationary, but its lights pulsed more brightly now, as if signaling something to the humans. Something was about to happen, something they weren't prepared for. Ethan had never felt so small. The comms panel crackled to life again. Humanity, the voice from the ship boomed, deeper now, more resonant. You have been found worthy of the test. The time has come for you to prove yourselves. Prepare for the challenge. And with that, the transmission ended. Hours passed, and the crew worked tirelessly. They had no clear understanding of what kind of challenge the aliens were referring to, but they knew it was coming. Something was being set into motion, and they had to be ready for it. Sir, Lieutenant Dwyer spoke up, his eyes locked on his console. There's something strange. The energy readings from the ship are fluctuating. It's almost like the ship is powering up. The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. If the ship was powering up, then something was about to happen. Something big. Suddenly, the entire station shuddered. A low rumble vibrated through the walls, a sensation that felt like the very foundation of the Phoenix was being shaken by an unseen force. The lights flickered, then dimmed, as the station's power system struggled to keep up with the sudden surge of energy. Report. Ethan barked. Power surge in all systems, shouted one of the crew members. It's coming from the alien ship. The energy readings are off the charts. The station shook again, more violently this time, as a bright light flared from the alien vessel. It wasn't just a beam now, it was a massive wave of energy, like a tidal force in space, rushing toward the Phoenix. Get us out of here. Ethan shouted. But it was too late. The energy wave hit, and everything went black. Ethan Mitchell awoke with a jolt, his heart racing. His surroundings were no longer familiar. The cold metal walls of the Phoenix had been replaced by an eerie, pale glow. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the disorientation. The buzzing in his ears, the feeling that the very air around him was different, it all hit him at once. The stars were gone, replaced by something far more unsettling, a vast, endless darkness, punctuated only by a strange, shifting light. The crew was scattered around the command center, most of them still dazed. Lieutenant Rachel Johnson was the first to speak, her voice sharp with concern. Ethan, what the hell happened? She asked, her eyes scanning the room. Where are we? Ethan stood slowly, his legs feeling like jelly. He could feel the familiar hum of the station's life support systems, but there was something else, a tension in the air, an electric pulse that vibrated through the walls. They weren't on the Phoenix anymore. That much was clear. I don't know, Ethan replied, his voice hoarse. But we're not on the station. And we're not in the same place we were. The alien ship did this. Rachel was already at her console, fingers moving quickly over the keys. The readings are off the charts, she muttered, her brow furrowing. It's like we've been transported to another dimension, or another part of the galaxy. The coordinates don't make any sense. We're nowhere near where we were. Ethan's stomach churned. The idea that they had been relocated, displaced from their familiar space in the universe, was both thrilling and terrifying. But something else gnawed at him, the alien ship. Its energy, its presence. Whatever they had just experienced, whatever it was that had caused the sudden loss of power and the disappearance of the stars, had to be linked to the ship. The ship wasn't just an alien vessel, it was a force, an entity that had the power to alter reality itself. "We need to figure out what they want," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the rising panic inside him. "Whatever this is, it's a test. The aliens said we needed to prove ourselves. This is their trial." The crew had no time to waste. The silence of the void pressed in on them, making every sound in the room seem louder. Every click of a button, every creak of the walls felt unnatural, as if the station itself was an intruder in this strange new environment. Rachel, Lucas, and the others worked tirelessly at their stations, trying to get a clearer understanding of their location, their situation, and any signs of life. But there was nothing, just the oppressive blackness. Hours passed, or maybe it was days, it was hard to tell in the void. The crew had lost all sense of time. It felt like an eternity had passed since they last saw the stars, since they last felt the safety of the Phoenix. The station, now an alien place, felt more like a tomb than a vessel. And then, without warning, the lights flickered to life, bright, unnatural, pulsating with an intensity that hurt the eyes. The lights moved in strange patterns, creating symbols in the air, like some kind of coded message being transmitted by the alien force. And then came the voice. "Humanity," it boomed, its tone both commanding and cryptic. The voice was the same as before, deep, resonant, and overwhelming. "You have been chosen. You will prove your worth through the trials. Only those who survive will be allowed to return. The rest will remain lost, forgotten." The crew stood frozen, fear creeping into their bones. Ethan's throat went dry. "Trials," he muttered. "What kind of trials?" The voice responded, a slight change in its cadence that suggested it had understood his question. "You will face challenges that will test your mind, your strength, and your unity. Only by overcoming them will you be granted the right to ascend. The path is clear, but the journey is dangerous. Fail, and you will perish." The room went silent again, the weight of the words hanging heavily in the air. The crew looked at one another, their faces pale with dread. They had no idea what the trials would be, or what the price of failure might entail. But they knew one thing for sure, they had to succeed. They had no choice. The first trial began just as suddenly as the voice had spoken. The walls of the command center shimmered, and the room seemed to warp around them, twisting and folding into a new configuration. The crew found themselves standing on what appeared to be a vast, open plain, a barren wasteland, with no signs of life in sight. The ground beneath them was cracked and dry, as if it hadn't seen water in centuries. Above them, a sky of deep crimson stretched out, swirling with clouds that seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. The atmosphere felt thick, heavy, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. It was a place of death, a place of emptiness. "What is this?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling as she looked around. "Where are we?" Before Ethan could answer, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. A deep, bone-shaking tremor passed through the plain, and then, in the distance, a massive figure began to emerge from the ground. It was a creature, a behemoth, its form barely discernible through the shifting dust and smoke. It towered over them, its body covered in thick, armored plates, with eyes that glowed a menacing red. The creature moved slowly, deliberately, toward the crew. Each step it took sent shockwaves through the earth, and the crew had to brace themselves against the force of its movements. It was like nothing they had ever seen, something out of a nightmare. The air seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and the creature's presence felt almost predatory. "It's a test," Ethan muttered, his voice tight with fear. "It's testing us." Rachel swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Ethan didn't know. They didn't have the luxury of time to think it over. The creature was getting closer, its massive limbs dragging through the earth with an unsettling ease. The crew had only one option: fight. "Get ready!" Ethan shouted, grabbing a nearby weapon, one of the station's emergency defense tools. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As the creature charged, the crew scattered, firing their weapons at its thick, armored hide. The shots had no effect. The creature's skin was nearly impenetrable, and it didn't seem to care about the humans' feeble attempts to fight back. It let out a low, guttural growl, shaking the ground beneath them. Ethan knew that brute force wouldn't work. They needed a plan. But what could they do? They were in a strange, hostile world with no clear rules, facing a creature far beyond their capabilities. Then, suddenly, the creature stopped. It stood still for a moment, as if waiting for something. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and retreated into the distance, disappearing into the swirling dust. The crew stood in stunned silence, panting heavily from the adrenaline of the encounter. What had just happened? Why had the creature left? And then, the voice returned. "You have passed the first trial," it said, its tone as neutral as ever. "You have shown courage and strength. But there will be more trials to come. You are not yet safe." The crew was left reeling, still processing what they had just experienced. The trial had been a test of their survival instincts, of their ability to fight back in the face of unimaginable danger. But it had also been something more, a warning. "There's more coming," Rachel said quietly, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "This is only the beginning." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "We have to stick together. If we're going to get through this, we need to work as one." But deep down, he knew the trials would only get harder. The creature they had faced was only the first of many challenges to come. And he had no idea if they would be able to survive the next one. Ethan Mitchell stood at the front of the command center, his eyes scanning the screens that flickered erratically. It had been days, maybe weeks, since they had been pulled into the unknown, since the alien ship had transported them into this strange and hostile dimension. The crew had endured the first trial, survived the monstrous creature, and now they faced something even more insidious. The creeping fear that they might not make it out alive. Each new trial was more grueling than the last, and the unknown that hung over them like a cloud seemed to grow heavier by the day. But it wasn't just the trials that were weighing on Ethan, it was the growing sense that the crew was fracturing. The stress of their situation, the constant tension of being tested by an unfathomable alien force, was beginning to take its toll. Arguments had become more frequent, voices raised in frustration, distrust creeping into their words and actions. Ethan glanced at Rachel Johnson, who sat hunched over a console, her face pale, eyes tired. She hadn't slept in days, just like the rest of them. The atmosphere in the command center was thick with tension, and the crew was starting to unravel. They were all doing their best to hold it together, but no one could deny that something was wrong. "What's the status on the next trial?" Ethan asked, his voice low but commanding. Rachel glanced up at him, shaking her head. "It's impossible to say. The readings are erratic. Every time we think we have a handle on it, the system changes. We're being forced into different environments, different challenges. It's like the alien force is toying with us." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We can't let it break us. We need to stay focused." But the truth was, even he wasn't sure how much longer they could hold on. The trials were relentless, and with every passing day, it seemed more and more likely that they would fail. It was then that Sergeant Lucas Dwyer spoke up, his voice tinged with desperation. "Ethan, I don't think we can do this. Not anymore. Every challenge we face, it's like we're walking into a trap. I think they want us to fail. They're pushing us to the edge, testing us in ways we're not equipped for. And now we're all starting to crack." Ethan turned to face him, a cold chill creeping down his spine. Lucas had always been the steady one, the calm in the storm. To hear him speak like this was unnerving. "We can't think like that," Ethan replied, his voice firm, though his own doubts were beginning to gnaw at him. "We have no choice. If we fail, it's over. We have to keep pushing forward." But Lucas's eyes were filled with something darker than fear, something far more dangerous. I'm telling you, Ethan, we're being tested in ways no one was meant to endure. This isn't just a trial. It's a game. And I don't think we're meant to win. Ethan clenched his fists, but before he could respond, the comms panel flickered to life. A voice, one that was not of their own, echoed through the room, its tone low and menacing. You have proven your resilience, humans. But the next trial will push you further. You will face a choice, a decision that will shape your destiny. Do not fail. The consequences will be dire. The voice fell silent, and the room was plunged into an eerie quiet. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan could feel the weight of the alien's words settling over them like a blanket of dread. What kind of choice? Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Ethan didn't have an answer. But deep down, he had a terrible feeling that this trial would be unlike anything they had faced before. The alien force, it seemed, was giving them a chance to change the course of their fate. But how? And at what cost? The next trial arrived in the form of a holographic projection, a simulation designed to test their most fundamental human instincts. The crew was thrust into a vast, cold cityscape, its towering buildings and dark alleys reflecting the emptiness of the world around them. The sky was a sickly green, and the streets were littered with debris, a ghostly wind sweeping through the empty expanse. This isn't real, Rachel said, her voice shaky as she looked around. It's a simulation. We have to find a way out. But as soon as the words left her mouth, a sharp cry echoed through the streets. It was the sound of someone in pain, someone in distress. Without thinking, the crew rushed toward the source of the noise, only to find a woman, disheveled, bloodied, and terrified, standing in the middle of the street. "Help me," she screamed, her eyes wide with fear. "They're coming for me. They're going to kill me." The crew paused, confusion flashing across their faces. Who was this woman? What was she doing here? The simulation had become disturbingly real. It felt like a choice, like they were being forced to decide, help the woman, or abandon her. But why would the aliens set up a situation like this? Why create a moral dilemma? Ethan felt his heart race. This was too much to process. The trial was testing them, pushing them into a situation where they had to choose. Their humanity was on the line. But before he could speak, Lucas stepped forward, his expression cold, calculating. "We don't have time for this. She's not real. It's part of the trial." Rachel shot him a sharp look. "What are you talking about?" "She's in trouble." But Lucas was already moving, his face hardening with resolve. "We need to focus on the real mission. This is just a distraction. If we stop to help her, we'll be wasting valuable time." Ethan felt a pang of conflict. He understood Lucas's logic, time was a luxury they didn't have. But the human side of him, the part that couldn't ignore someone in need, rebelled against the decision. He looked at Rachel, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before Ethan could answer, Lucas turned on them, his eyes blazing with a dangerous intensity. "Stop questioning everything," he snapped. "We can't afford to care about people like her. We need to survive, and that means doing whatever it takes. We're not here to play hero. We're here to win." The words hit Ethan like a slap to the face. He'd never seen Lucas like this, not the steady, reliable man he had trusted to keep them all grounded. Lucas was changing, and not for the better. The stress, the trials, they were breaking him. But just as Lucas turned to leave, a new voice pierced the air, one that wasn't part of the simulation. It came from the comms, a voice that made Ethan's blood run cold. "Ethan," the voice said, calm and insistent. "You've failed." The words were chilling, spoken with the same cold tone as the alien force's previous messages. But this time, there was no hint of neutrality. This was an accusation. What? Ethan's voice faltered as he turned to the source of the voice. What do you mean? You've failed, the voice repeated. By allowing the betrayal to take root, you've sealed your fate. The test was to see whether you would remain united. But your crew is divided. And that, human, is your undoing. Ethan's stomach dropped. Betrayal? He knew what the voice was talking about. Lucas's decision to abandon the woman, to ignore the moral choice they had been presented with, had fractured the crew. And that fracture had consequences. There was no turning back now. The crew of the Phoenix was broken, scattered like debris in the vast emptiness of space. Each member, once united in their purpose, now stood on the brink of collapse, torn apart by doubt, fear, and betrayal. Lucas's choice to abandon the woman in the simulation, the voice's accusation that their unity had failed, it had all come to a head. But as they stood on the precipice of failure, something else stirred within them. Something primal, something that had always been there, waiting to be awakened. Ethan Mitchell stood alone in the command center, his hands gripping the edge of the console. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, disbelief, confusion, anger. The voice had been right. The crew was fractured. The alien force had been playing them, testing their ability to stay united, to remain human in the face of unimaginable odds. But how could they remain united when their very survival seemed impossible? How could they stay true to each other when everything around them was falling apart? Ethan, we need to talk, Rachel's voice cut through the silence. Ethan turned slowly, his gaze meeting hers. Her face was pale, eyes haunted by the weight of the trials, but there was a flicker of something in her expression, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just fear, it was determination. I know, Ethan replied quietly. I've been thinking the same thing. Rachel stepped closer, her voice low but firm. We can't keep going like this. We're on the edge. Lucas, what he did, it's tearing us apart. We've all been pushed too far. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. I know. But we don't have a choice. The alien force, they're testing us, Rachel. The trials, they're not just about survival. They're about something deeper. Something more dangerous. We've failed, Rachel said flatly. We failed the trial. The voice, It said that our unity was broken. No, Ethan said, shaking his head, a surge of defiance rising within him. We haven't failed yet. Not completely. Rachel blinked, confusion flickering across her face. What do you mean? The voice said. The voice was wrong, Ethan interrupted. We've been looking at this all wrong. The alien force, they've been pushing us to break. To tear ourselves apart. But there's something else we've missed. We haven't been tested in the way we thought. This isn't about power or strength. This isn't about survival. It's about something deeper. It's about our humanity. Rachel frowned, as though she didn't quite understand what Ethan was saying. Humanity? What does that even mean, Ethan? We're on the verge of losing everything. Ethan's gaze hardened, his mind now clearer than it had ever been. We've been tested on our ability to fight, to survive, to overcome challenges. But the one thing we haven't been tested on is our capacity for unity. The alien force doesn't want us to fail. They want us to realize something about ourselves. Something we've always had, but never understood. We are stronger than we think. Stronger than we think? Rachel repeated, as if trying to make sense of it. Ethan, we're barely holding on. The trials are getting worse. I know, Ethan said quietly. But this is the key. Humanity isn't just about our bodies or our minds. It's about something more, a resilience that comes from our connection to each other. It's something that no other species has. The aliens, they've never encountered anything like it. Rachel took a step back, her eyes widening as the realization dawned on her. "You think we can win?" Ethan met her gaze, his heart pounding. "I think we have no choice but to try." The alien trials had been brutal, each one pushing the crew to their limits. They had faced horrors that no one should have to endure, had been forced to make impossible decisions, and had watched as their unity fractured under the weight of pressure. But through it all, something had remained untouched. Deep inside, the crew of the Phoenix still held onto a belief that despite the odds, despite the overwhelming power of the alien force, they could survive. They had to. "I'm not saying it'll be easy," Ethan continued, his voice steady now. "But the alien force wants us to break. They want us to give up. But what if that's the wrong answer? What if, instead of breaking, we decide to stand together? What if, instead of falling apart, we choose to trust each other?" Rachel nodded slowly. "You're right. We've been fighting the wrong battle. It's not about us versus them. It's about us, all of us, together. If we can't trust each other, we won't make it." It was time to confront the alien force, to face the final trial. The crew gathered in the command center, each one exhausted, battle-worn, but determined. The fractures that had appeared among them still existed. But now there was something new, an unspoken understanding. They were in this together. No matter what. Ethan stood before them, his voice steady. "This is it. The final trial. We've been through hell. We've fought creatures, faced our own fears, and made decisions that will haunt us for the rest of our lives. But we're still here. We're still standing. And we're going to face whatever comes next, together." There was a moment of silence, then Rachel stepped forward, her eyes burning with the same fire that Ethan felt in his chest. "We've been tested on everything, our strength, our minds, our unity. But what we've learned is that the true power lies in our ability to connect with each other. The alien force doesn't understand that. But we do. We are stronger when we work together." The others nodded in agreement, a quiet resolve settling over them. It wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest, it was about staying true to each other, to their shared humanity. And then, without warning, the voice returned. "You have learned well, humans," it said, its tone colder than ever. "But your trials are far from over. Prepare for the final test." The room shook as the final trial began. The lights flickered, and the ground beneath them trembled. The crew braced themselves, ready for whatever the alien force had prepared. The landscape around them changed, warping and shifting as the alien force's true nature began to reveal itself. The environment became a chaotic landscape of shifting energies and distorted realities. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist around them. The crew stood firm, their eyes locked onto each other. They had come this far, and they weren't going to give up now. Together, they faced the trial, knowing that this was their final chance to prove themselves. The alien force's voice rang out one last time. "You have learned to trust each other. You have learned to fight together. But now, you must prove it. Will you stand united in the face of the unknown? Or will you crumble before the final challenge?" The crew didn't answer immediately. They didn't need to. The bond between them was stronger than any words could express. The orb's light pulsated, casting long, shifting shadows across the crystalline walls of the chamber. Each pulse seemed to reverberate deep within the bones of the crew, a sensation so intense it felt like it was vibrating through their very souls. The silence in the room was suffocating, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Ethan Mitchell stood at the front of the group, his hands clenched into fists. His heart was pounding in his chest as the orb's voice rang out again, clearer this time, its words resonating through the chamber with an almost hypnotic power. "Only one may take the power," the orb repeated, its voice unyielding. "But it will come at a cost. Choose wisely." For a moment, there was only the sound of breathing, the crew's collective breaths coming. In shallow, ragged gasps. They had made it this far, had survived the alien trials, faced unimaginable horrors, and overcome impossible challenges. But now they stood at the precipice of something far greater. The decision before them was simple, yet its consequences were vast. Who among them would claim the power? And what would it cost? Ethan felt his mind racing. He had seen so much over the past weeks. He had seen the way their unity had been tested, how the crew had struggled, how it had been pushed to the brink. They had learned something about themselves that they hadn't known before, something that set them apart from the alien force. They were stronger together, not as individuals, but as a collective. But the orb had spoken of a cost, a price that would be paid. Could they risk it? Rachel stepped forward, her face grim but resolute. We can't ignore the fact that one of us has to claim the power. But we also can't ignore the warning. The cost. It sounds like it will be something significant. Ethan nodded, his eyes locked on the orb. The trials, they've been pushing us to understand our strength. But I think the real test has always been about something more. The aliens, whatever they are, they don't understand humanity. They don't understand our ability to unite. But what if that's the very thing we need to claim this power? Rachel's gaze softened, but there was no hesitation in her voice. We've been through so much already. And we've learned something crucial. It's not about one person. It's about us, all of us, working together. Ethan met her eyes and then turned to face the rest of the crew. They were all gathered around the orb now, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and resolve. Each one of them had faced their own personal trial, had made sacrifices, had been forced to confront their deepest fears. And yet, here they were, still standing, together. This isn't just about taking power, Ethan said, his voice steady. It's about how we use that power. If we choose the right way, if we choose to remain united, we can rise above whatever the alien force has set before us. Lucas Dwyer, who had once been the most skeptical of them all, now stood at Ethan's side. His face was drawn, but there was a new light in his eyes, a glimmer of something he hadn't shown before. The fractures that had torn the crew apart seemed to have healed, at least for the moment. We've been broken, tested, torn apart. But we're still here. And that counts for something, Lucas said, his voice gruff but full of conviction. We need to trust each other now more than ever. Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with a fierce pride. Exactly. This is our moment. Our final trial isn't just about power. It's about the future. What we do here will determine what happens next, whether we continue to survive or whether we let the alien force win. The crew stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Ethan's words hanging heavy in the